Welcome everyone. For our meeting tonight, we're going to go over some supplemental training in preparation for our first CERT review, Critical Incident Response Team case that we are going to go over. We'll have my report out, Mummy's report out. We've got time for public comment and open discussion, but we'll just go ahead and get started. And I've got attendance since we're virtual, and we can dive right into training. Mummy, is there anything you want to kind of open about the case we're preparing for and our training today?
Yeah, just as the PowerPoint loads, we wanted to spend some time just going over what a CERT investigation even means. We have, I think, new COB members. Also, it's a refresher for existing COB members, and then wanted to also provide an educational opportunity for members of the public to kind of understand what happens when a critical incident occurs, leading into our next meeting where we'll be reviewing a police-involved shooting that occurred in October of 2022, where we utilized the critical incident response team to conduct the investigation, which I then recently reviewed and will go over, and the COB will do their review of at the next meeting. But we thought this would be a good kind of training session and refresher for some going into that, so we can talk about what those investigations consist of and then specifically what the roles are. Let me get the, are you all able to see the full view of it or just the kind of presenter view?
The full view.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I am, again, the title of the training is the Understanding CERT Investigations and Oversight Collaboration. I'm going to be doing the training tonight in conjunction with Chief Penn and Captain Kim from ACPD. The beginning portion is more about CERT specifically and the history of it and critical incidents. So I'll just facilitate us through that dialogue, but most of the presentation I'm going to defer to Chief Penn and Captain Kim on, and then towards the end, I'll talk more specifically about the civilian oversight aspect of it, and that's when I'll take over a little bit more of the presentation. So just for an agenda for this evening, we want to first talk about what are CERT investigations, and as I said, explain the roles of not just civilian oversight, but what ACPD does, what I do as the IPA, and then the Community Oversight Board. First, we're going to talk just about what a critical incident is. So I'll turn it over to either Chief Penn or Captain Kim to take over from here, and then we'll talk specifically about what CERT is.
So thank you, Mummy. And to start talking about CERT, I think we have to talk about the MOU. And that MOU is a document where agencies around the Northern Virginia area decided to sign and say, hey, when we have a critical incident, we're going to activate a special team. This team is going to be comprised of representatives from all these different agencies. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow these individuals to come in and sort of collect evidence, take witness statements, conduct the criminal investigation. And in this way, we will have an independent look as to what happened. So no one from the host agency, for instance, if the Arlington County Police Department is involved in a shooting, then no one from our agency will be involved with the evidence collection, the witness interviews, et cetera, et cetera. That provides this very clear line of delineation and creates this independence for the CERT team to kind of do their thing. Under the MOU, there are 5 reasons why a chief or a sheriff can activate the CERT team. And then those those reasons are an intentional or accidental shooting, any action used by a sworn law enforcement officer which results in the death of or a life-threatening injury of a person during the performance of an officer's duties, any in-custody death as defined by this MOU, police officer suicide, and CERT will not investigate motor vehicle crashes resulting in the death of any person unless the vehicle was used in deadly force. So those are like the 5 things that a police chief or a sheriff can activate the CERT team for. That MOU was signed by the agencies back in November 13th, I think, of 2021. The effective date of the MOU was actually in December of 2020. And then within the body of this MOU, it basically says every 5 years, the signatories will have to re-sign the MOU and sort of agree to continue to do this thing. And so, you know, it took a little bit of time for all the agencies to get on board. Obviously, you can see that in December, this MOU was drafted, and then it wasn't until November of the following year that everyone kind of signed off on it. And you can see on the screen the signatories of the CERT MOU. These are all the agencies that participate on the CERT team, and they have training twice a year. I think they're in a training cycle right now where they have a 3-day training block that's going on, and they'll have another 1-day training that will occur in the fall. And so they do get together on a regular basis, semi-annually, to make sure that they have the best practices and procedures, and however, you know, if there's been any legal changes or law changes that they need to be aware of, and then talk about lessons learned from other incidents that they've had to deal with.
So the purpose behind CERT was all the regional chiefs, you know, came together, and Arlington had a lot to do with the formation of this idea. But the concept is when there's an incident, like a police involved shooting, there's always 2 investigations, the criminal investigation and the administrative investigation. And obviously the criminal investigation is the priority investigation. And the idea was to make sure that when we have to do a criminal investigation into actions of our members, that it be done completely by an outside entity and not our staff. For the first, I don't know, 25, 28 years I worked here, we were in a position where our detectives would have to do this investigation. So this really gives an opportunity where it's, you know, it's not just one agency that comes. Normally a CERT response would be like, maybe there's a detective from Prince William, a detective from Alexandria, a detective from Manassas Park or Manassas City. So it's a team from across the region that comes, and they're responsible for the entirety of it. It certainly pushes it to a truly independent investigation, independent to the point where the CERT team is who provides it to the Commonwealth's attorney, who is the final decision in the criminal investigation part. And that's done completely by the team and not any of the agencies involved as well. So I think it's been a really positive thing across the region. We've had some additional localities join, and I'm assuming there might be more in the future, but so far I think it's worked incredibly well. You know, in the beginning, it's always, you know, it's a different process, but overall, I think it's been very positive. That's it.
Yeah. Selena, you had a question that I'm seeing in the chat, which is how long does it take for the CERT team to arrive? So once the determination is made by the chief that it will be a CERT investigation, we will, phone calls will be made to the assistant commander, and I believe the assistant commander right now, the CERT team and the commander is with ACPD, right? I'm not 100%. The commander of the CERT team is within ACPD. Now, I just want to make this clear. That commander, if it's an ACPD shooting, has nothing to do with the investigation, collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses. I just want to make that very clear. Just the commander resides with us, and that rotates between agencies. So I believe it's our turn right now to have the commander. That commander doesn't do anything. He just kind of manages the team, make sure that the trainings get conducted, make sure that, you know, all the other logistical things occur when you have this regional team. So, you know, once the determination is made by the chief, those phone calls will go out immediately. That commander will make a determination on who's up per se, and then the people that are up will come in and basically come in inbound as quickly as they possibly can. It can take a little bit longer, just slightly longer, because if you can imagine traveling from Prince William or Manassas, it's just going to take a little bit longer. But be mindful that our detectives, especially if it happens in the middle of the night, a lot of whom do not live in Arlington County, would be traveling those distances already, if that makes sense. So if we have a shooting that occurs at 2 a.m, we're calling people from their home. i.e. if we didn't have a CERT team, if that most of our personnel here don't live in Arlington, so they would be traveling from Prince William, Manassas, Spotsylvania, places like that to come in and assist with us. So the delay is not going to be any longer, if you will, than calling our own in-house folks who don't necessarily live in Arlington. I hope that answers your question.
One thing I would add to that is, it's not as though there's not some things that we have to do. So before the investigators from the outside in to get here, we had the responsibility to secure the crime scene, make sure medical treatment's taken care of, identify witnesses and try to keep them there. But if they have to go, at least have a way for the CERT team to get in touch with them. So all of that is done by the impacted locality because that has to be done in the initial minutes. And then, then everything is handed to CERT as soon as they arrive. There's a official briefing that happens as soon as the team is there, and then that's the handoff.
Thank you. So that might be a good segue. Sorry, I think we're about to say the same thing, to just talk about what the CERT investigative process looks like from the time they respond to the scene onward.
Yeah, so kind of what we talked about. If you can imagine that, if we were talking about an officer-involved shooting, and the initial stages, we have a response, and I know, Mummy, you're going to get to about the MOU agreement about getting notification within an hour, the command post. We have a public safety statement that we've gathered. Public safety statement would basically be something to kin to like, how many rounds did you fire? What general direction did you fire those rounds at? We need to know that information to ensure that there might not be any unintentional bystanders that were struck by these rounds. So that public safety statement is going to be gathered very quickly. Everyone's going to rally up at the command post. There'll be this initial briefing between the incident commander, the in-house, like the ACPD incident commander, the supervisors, and then the CERT team, who needs to understand the scope of this crime scene. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a car? Are we talking about a street corner? Are we talking about something that may extend a couple of blocks? So they need to have a grasp on what they're dealing with. Once that is determined, and hopefully I'm certain of this, we have secured the crime scenes in the area that we need to sort of make sure that no one is walking through. So let me talk about this because I see interview involved parties. Interview involved parties, that's very easy to do. So if you're a witness that's not an officer, maybe a bystander who's seen something, maybe a neighbor who called in the police, that's all going to be done through the normal investigative steps that we possibly, that anyone would do when we're sort of arriving on scene and gathering information about a criminal incident that takes place. If you're talking about interviewing police officers who have discharged their weapon, that is a separate and different process that I will talk to after I'm seeing on this sort of flow chart here, collecting evidence and overseeing the evidence processing. So let me skip to that. Let me actually bypass that for now. So while that CERT team is on scene, you're going to have crime scene specialists that specialize in collecting evidence. We have our own, right? We have our master police officers who are specialists and subject matter experts in collecting crime scene evidence, photographing it, documenting it. They are not going to be the individuals that are collecting the evidence. It's going to be the outhouse, the sort of the adjoining members that are doing this crime scene collection. They're going to be the ones that are collecting rounds, checking ballistics, doing all that stuff. Meanwhile, the officers that were involved in the incident are then going to be sort of brought to the police stations as a sort of like, no other way, better way to say this, but like a holding area for them. Okay, so they're going to be brought to the station. They will have a companion officer, so that way they're not left alone. And at some point in time, when we get this initial view and understanding about what happened, the lead CERT investigator and a member of the OPR staff which usually is me and maybe a couple of my staff members, will come up and will explain the process to the officer, whether they be a witness or a subject officer. That criminal investigative process that needs to be explained to be done to them will be done jointly. And that's per the CERT MOU. It's going to be done both with OPR and the lead CERT investigator. An officer involved in a shooting has the same rights as any other citizen or individual to either choose to participate in a criminal investigative interview or not participate in that criminal investigative interview. All the rights that are afforded under the Fifth Amendment, those constitutional rights, are also afforded to the police officer, right? The right to remain silent, the right to have counsel present, the right to stop questioning. All those constitutional guarantees are afforded to that officer during a criminal interview. That criminal interview, by policy, okay, will not occur more than within basically we have a cooling off period. And so there is a 72-hour cooling off period that we give the police officer to allow them to sort of digest what occurred, right? So you're going to come in and either participate or not participate in this criminal investigative interview within 72 hours of the incident occurring. That is within our policy that takes place. You know, if an officer chooses not to participate, then that's another step on the administrative side, but we got to get through all these other steps before we have that administrative interview. So let's say hypothetically the officer participates in this criminal investigative interview. OPR has the ability to monitor that interview as it's taken place. And the reason we do that, number one, is to get more information. And number two, hopefully avoid having to do a second administrative interview, asking the same exact questions that this criminal investigator has asked, right? We do not ask any questions. I want to make that very clear. On a criminal investigative interview, OPR will not ask any questions. We can't, we won't. We can simply listen to the questions and listen to the responses to make sure that there's no outstanding questions that we may have about this. I don't know if this is a good time, Mummy, to talk about sort of the employee wellness pieces that we've sort of instituted. I can talk about that later. I can talk about that now. I think you have some reference to our 53807 policy about critical incidents.
Yeah, that was I think 2 slides back, the policy itself, but I'm happy to go backwards if you want to pull that up, or if you want to just talk about it now, or on the next slide, we'll talk specifically about your role during certain investigations. So whatever makes the most sense for you in terms of flow of conversation.
Let me do this chronologically now, because it probably makes the most sense, because now we sort of talked about this idea of, you know, having this joint meeting between OPR and the investigators with the officer and giving that officer 72 hours. Okay, there's a lot of things on the employee wellness side that and I say we, but law enforcement did not do a very good job of 20 years ago, which is, now that this critical incident has taken place, are we ensuring the wellness of this employee? How are we going to ensure that this employee who's done something, you know, very traumatic, we can bring them back in a prescriptive way, right? It's not hodgepodge. We are being intentional about this process, and we're explaining this process to this employee, and they can take the amount of time that they need to come back. So one of the things that was a change that we just made to our policy of 53807 is this critical incident debrief that has to take place with I think it's clinical medical practitioner or something like that, basically a clinician, that has to take place between these different time periods. And we got and adopted those time periods from IACP best practices. The IACP says, the International Association of Chiefs of Police says, when you have an officer involved in a traumatic incident like this, you need to conduct regular critical incident debriefs with this officer, with the clinician in this cycle, 4 months, 6 months, and 12 months. That was the IACP recommendation, and that is what we've adopted, because that, to them, who has, studied this intently, that is the best way to do this. What we also did recently was, sort of prescribe this way that an officer can come back within phases. Okay, this did not exist before, and it's funny because I talk about it with other agencies. I recently talked about this with other agencies. I would be shocked if another agency has a prescribed way to bring an officer back in phases after a critical incident, right? Phase 1 might be light duty, okay, some office task. Phase 2 might be riding with someone. Phase 3 might be riding solo, but for half a shift. It's really going to depend on where the officer is, how comfortable they are, but it's prescribed. The supervisors understand that this is the method you bring an officer back from a critical incident. We're not going to rush it. Some officers may take a little bit time in the different phases, but because the officer is not assigned to OPR, I don't have control over that. I have to rely on the supervisors to bring this person back in a meaningful way. And the supervisor needs some sort of guidance on how to do that. And that's a recent thing. And I'm going to tell you right now, not many agencies have this, but we do. We just developed this process to bring an officer back in a phased process, which is the best way to bring an officer back from an incident. So I just wanted to throw that out there since we're sort of talking about this. Let me go back to these questions here that I am seeing now. So David has one. Can ACPD suggest questions for the certain investigators? No. The answer to that is no. That's an easy answer. No. Is a criminal and or administrative interview recorded like regular OPR interviews? The answer is yes. They are. They are recorded in an interview room, and they are recorded with Axon sort of interview camera, so we can watch it and we can listen to it. So those are the answers to your question.
There's one other question. Does an officer have legal representation at the interview? That's really up to the officer. Our union has representation for anybody involved in this type of an incident that are contacted, and they usually come out to the scene or to the station, and then whether they come with the officer to the interview or not, that's really up to the officer, but there's an attorney available for them.
And so now let's go to number 5, which is present findings to the Commonwealth Attorney, ACPD leadership, and IPS. So what happens is, now that I'm skipping ahead, so the CERT team has done the officer interviews, it's collected the evidence, they interviewed other witnesses who may be on scene, and now they're doing sort of what we like to call their presentation. That presentation is going to be for the chief of police, his executive staff, the Commonwealth's attorney, and then the independent policing auditor and myself. And they're going to present their findings, basically like, hey, this is the sequence of events based on the evidence that we collected. This is what we have determined to have happened. That is going to be presented to the Commonwealth's attorney's office. The Commonwealth attorney will then make a determination. This either was a violation of law or this was not a violation of law. If it's determined that it was not a crime that occurred, right, with the discharge of a firearm at another person, then they will issue, generally speaking, either a report or a letter of declination. That letter of declination or that report is going to say something to the effect of, I've reviewed this incident and all the facts surrounding it, and we're not going to prosecute. It was not a violation of law of what occurred. So it'll be something to that effect. Are witness officers that feel impacted afforded the same phase? And yes, the answer is 100% yes. There is no distinction that's made between witness officers and subject officers who discharge their firearm. They are treated the same exact way. They will go through the same phase, because just because you did not discharge your firearm does not mean that you were severely impacted about what you went through. So yes, they are treated the exact same way. Good question though. Okay, so I went to number 6. Commonwealth determines whether criminal charges against the officers are warranted. And once that letter of declination occurs, that's when OPR will begin its review/investigation to determine whether or not a policy violation has occurred. Remember, that's sort of our mandate, which is OPR will look at all the policies that we have: constitutional rights, compliance to laws, use of force. Did the officer, when they discharge their firearm, violate any of the policies that exist that we have? The answer is either going to be yes or no. And if the answer is yes, then there will be a recommendation for discipline. So.
I have a question. Sorry to jump in. Can you just speak to if the process that you're outlining here is, the typical process that we see, but if there was a situation that was, really different in the sense of you're watching the footage and the kind of initial impression is that it's a shoot that or a use of force that was maybe not within policy, or just from your first kind of glance, obviously you still have to do an investigation. Could you speak a little bit to maybe how some of that administrative process may differ? Understanding that it's, a case by case basis.
Yes. And so the biggest, and one thing, so you reminded me of this. Whenever we have an officer involved shooting, that officer is always placed on administrative leave. Okay, so that is just a standard practice. It's administrative leave. They're going to be placed on administrative leave, generally speaking, with pay. If there is a belief that the shooting for some reason was a violation of law or a clear violation of policy, there will be an additional relief from duty. Okay, so the difference is administrative leave does not relieve you of duty. Okay, you are just on leave. When you are relieved of duty, you no longer have law enforcement powers or anything like that. So you're not a police officer anymore. We are still going to have to allow the criminal process to work out, right? So that criminal process or that criminal review with the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, that is still going to have to play out before OPR initiates anything per se. We're going to have to work this out through the criminal legal system that always takes precedent over the administrative side. The one difference is that singular piece of paper that says you are relieved of duty, you no longer have law enforcement authorities, please hand me over, the stuff that you have that you use to enforce the laws. So that would be the biggest difference. Chief, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, that's how the process works. I mean, an officer is certainly entitled to the same due process as everyone else. So that's the point of the criminal investigation, followed by the administrative investigation. And, the two different processes that have been set up are designed to operate, parallel, but not touching one another really, because the administrative is very different than the criminal investigation. And throughout this, we're very intentional to make sure that we take care of the officer too, because it's something no police officer ever wants to have to do, but sometimes it happens. And, it's important that we provide for a very thorough and complete investigation, both criminal and administrative. But at the same time, we take care of the staff that are involved. And if we had a shooting that we don't think is justified, we would go down the road that Albert just explained. But I don't think I have anything else to add.
And the one thing I will add too is that, some of you guys have heard this before, Garrity. Like Garrity is a Supreme Court ruling about compelled statements during an administrative interview. And I'll just give you a little history on this. It all goes back to like this 1967 New Jersey ticket fixing scheme that these New Jersey cops were doing. And so their supervisors brought them into this room and basically said, hey, look, you have two options. You can either tell me what happened, whether or not you fixed these tickets, or I'm going to fire you if you refuse to talk to me. Oh, and by the way, everything that you say during this interview is also going to be used against you in the criminal trial when we prosecute you for fixing these tickets. Okay, so the Supreme Court said, hey, you cannot do that. You can't threaten someone with their job and their livelihood and then turn around and use it against them in a criminal case. And so I'm bringing this up because if I call you in for an interview It's not an option. You don't get to say, oh, well, I'm not going to answer your questions. I don't have anything to say. You are compelled to provide a statement. If you do not provide a statement, there are severe and significant administrative penalties for that. So that would be a compelled statement. Okay. So that cannot be used against in a criminal case. That's why we don't go down that road. It's well established. We have to allow the criminal process to play out because those are voluntary statements given under our Miranda advisement, and that per individual knows what their constitutional rights are, right? The right to remain silent, say, have an attorney present, et cetera, et cetera.
So can I ask a quick question? Hypothetically, could you put somebody on leave without pay prior to the conclusion of the criminal investigation?
Leave without pay? Yes, we could do that.
Okay.
I mean, there's leave, but what I'm saying is leave with pay and leave without pay. If that's really going to be situationally dependent, but I want to say this very clearly that generally speaking, it's leave with pay. So it is leave with pay.
And does leave without pay also, would that incorporate relief of duty? Is that the same thing? Or could you be on leave without pay and still maintain your weapon?
They're different things, but I gotta be honest. I mean, if you're leave without pay, there's a high likelihood you also are relieved of duty. It's just a high likelihood. So, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily like every single case. They are independent of one another. I just want to make that clear. So,
Got it. Thank you.
Josh, you had a question?
I did, yes. Just very quickly, because I got a little bit confused. Going back to the 72-hour period, it was referred to as a cool down period, but also it being referred to as like within that 72 hours. So is it 72 hours from the incident that then the officers are interviewed for that criminal? Is that my understanding, or is there a different kind of thing there?
so I'm gonna cut right to the chase for practical purposes. Okay, we have a weird and goofy schedule that you all are very aware of. We have the 5 days on, 4 days off, 5 days on, 4 days off schedule. It's very, very goofy. Okay, hypothetically, if an officer is like, I will talk to the investigator for a criminal interview, but I'm not back for like 84 hours. I need another day. We're going to allow that to happen. I would rather have the officer participate in that criminal interview, if voluntarily, than say, hey, you have to do this within 72 hours. I understand what the policy says, but in practical terms, that's more of a guide. Does that answer your question, Josh, or no?
I believe so, actually. So generally the policy then is they are given 72 hours, right? It's not within 72
Correct.
hours, 2
That's-
hours.
that-
And
that's-
then because it is a policy, you can flex it. That's what I'm understanding.
It is, and the officer, it's up to 72 hours, but if the officer is ready and wants to make the statement the next afternoon, that's fine.
Okay.
And you want to
Thank you.
know, Josh, you actually bring up a good point. The reason why this is in there is because it used to not be in there. Okay, and so if you can imagine an officer going through something very significant, very traumatic, and be like, hey, we're going to interview you right now about this. Okay, and they are not necessarily ready for that. Okay, they're not going to be able to provide the best statement. They're not going to have a clear recollection of everything. This has already been scientifically proven that if you wait a day or two, you are going to have a recall better about the sequence of events than if you interview someone right after a traumatic event. So you are going to be able to recall things a little bit better.
Thank you. And it's
And sorry,
the
Joshua. I called you Josh by accident. It's
You're
for some
fine.
reason, it's just so intuitive to call you Joshua. Joshua. Sorry, did you have another piece of the question?
Yeah, just was the last follow-up question of
Sure.
which policy we are referencing here with the 72 hours.
53807.
All right, thank you.
I have one question that I just thought about. I attended a PERF conference, I maybe it was about a year and a half ago. It was a 10-year anniversary of the kind of like launching of body-worn camera footage. And there was I would say maybe like a 50-50 split or like a room-wide debate of chiefs from all different departments talking about critical incidents and whether or not they allow their officers to watch body-worn camera footage before giving their interviews. Could you speak a little bit to the process for that in Arlington?
The process is that, generally speaking, we do not permit that. We want to get the officers' perceptions, what they were experiencing at the time of the event, rather than it be colored by something that they are watching. What do you remember? What do you remember seeing? And if the officer watches a body-worn camera, and you all have seen the video, the body-worn camera does not capture every single angle. There are positions that I can turn to that are going to obscure what is viewable on the body-worn camera, right? Maybe it obscures the individual's left arm or right arm, and the officer doesn't see that on the body-worn camera, then becomes concerned about, hey, did that actually happen? But remembers it clearly. Hey, they had an instrument, they had a weapon in their left hand. You just can't see it in the body-worn camera. That becomes an issue for the officer. What we want to do is get the officer's recollection of the sequence of events, and the best way to do that is to have them recall the event after this 72-hour waiting period, when they've had time to digest this, and tell us exactly what they remember and what they recall about the events.
Doesn't mean they can't watch the body camera after the initial conversation. But, you know, I believe the best way is to get a statement of what the officer remembers, what they felt, what they saw, what they heard, and then there's no reason not to watch the video once all that piece is done, for clarity or for clarification points. But, you know, I think the best method is to get a statement up front. Based
And
on
then
memory.
they're able to provide any sort of supplemental information after watching the video if
Sure.
they'd like to.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. There's certainly, I think, pros and cons to both of it, but I think more police departments are doing it the way that Arlington does it.
Okay.
Was that it for this slide? Any other questions?
I think so. Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
All right, so
So to Charles's question, are officers allowed to talk to each other before the interviews? No. I mean, we asked people not to have any conversations with one another, you know, at all before the interview and really during the process. I mean, talk to a therapist or somebody to make sure you're getting whatever help you need, but as far as debriefs and, conversations where we're do it, that has to wait for the criminal investigation piece to be over.
Yeah. And I mean, that's in the officer's best interest too, right? They don't want to be making statements and then say, hey, but Billy told me this, you know what I mean? So it's in the officer's best interest. Talk to your attorney, talk to peer support, talk to your clinician, talk to your spouse. Those are the people that you should be talking to about the incident. Do you want me to go through that? Okay, so we've kind of touched on this already, why we have a CERT team. We don't investigate our own officers. We don't collect evidence. We don't interview our own officers. All we do is basically what this says up there, which is support scene security and logistics throughout the liaison. So for instance, if the CERT team needs body-worn camera footage, if they need access to documents and those things for their investigation, OPR is the keeper of those records because they are all locked down. The reason we lock those records down, those body-worn cameras and those case reports, is I can't have officers looking at them and sharing them, right? So you can, like, supervisors are permitted to share body-worn camera video. So we can't have that happen. It's not that I don't trust them, but I can't have random people looking at the videos, and I certainly can't have an accidental sharing take place with a body-worn camera video that we have. So they all get completely locked down. OPR is the only individuals within this agency, once those videos and documents are locked down, that can touch and has access to those documents. So the sharing process has to come through OPR. The investigator, the lead investigator, will reach out to me and say, hey, I need all the body worn camera. I need all this. No problem. I just shove it over there. I don't ask any questions. What else do you need? Okay, you need this. I need access to like, interview room or something like that. We have people that handle those logistics, but when it comes to documents and video sharing, that's run through OPR to make sure that we are keeping a tight control over those documents. OPR conducts administrative investigation. We already talked about that. And again, the mandate is policy violations. We have many policies that sort of overlap that touch on OIS, but our mandate is, did anyone break any policies? The law is the Commonwealth Attorney's mandate. That's the person that gets to decide whether a law was broken. We just look at our policy and say, yes, policy violation, no policy violation.
All right, I will then segue into talking about my role in CERT investigations, putting in the chat a copy of our MOU. You can reference pages, I'm gonna put this in the chat as well, 13 through 19, if you wanna see the language, and there's also some visuals in there. That kind of show what the workflow is with CERT investigations. But as Albert mentioned earlier, per the MOU, I will be notified by either OPR or Chief Penn within 1 hour of any critical incident. And I have the ability to report directly to the scene of the incident. I would monitor any sort of kind of initial investigation that's going on. And I would also, usually the CERT team, once they've had an opportunity to come and, get a just basic assessment of what's going on, they'll provide kind of a briefing, introduce themselves, so we all know who's running point on the investigation and who's doing what. And they will, provide their contact information if you have questions or things like that, or just want to know, who's doing what. I'm basically right there with, Albert or Chief Penn or, any of the ACPD leadership staff. So I'm right there, hand in hand with them where they're standing. I have access to the exact same kind of vantage point, which, won't be necessarily directly right on the scene. It's going to be taped off a little bit, but, very close in perimeter to be able to see kind of what was going on. So that's a really key thing, because you always want to have a representative of civilian oversight agency, if they have the authority to do so, to be there and kind of get an initial assessment of what's going on, and be able to kind of I don't want to say lend credibility as though it wouldn't happen if you weren't there, but to be able to have a second set of independent eyes to say, like, this is what happened here, and to be able to include that information in your report, I think it's helpful. As Albert said, the officer interviews are conducted by the CERT team, but we can watch them remotely via live feed. So in the same way that I watch officer interviews live through Axon when they're happening for an administrative investigation, I can watch them as well in real time when they're doing their CERT interviews. So I won't be in the same room, but I'm watching it live on the footage. What the difference is, as Albert pointed out earlier, that I do not ask questions during those interviews as I could in an administrative interview. Well, okay, so at the conclusion of the investigation, as Albert mentioned earlier, there will be a briefing. This is going to be the more in-depth briefing where they're going to show footage and, all of the evidence that was collected and kind of really walk you through everything that occurred. So I would be attending that briefing as well. Once all of that is done, then we go into doing the administrative review or investigation. And this is after both the CERT team has concluded their criminal investigation, as well as the Commonwealth Attorney has decided whether or not criminal charges are appropriate. So that's what is considered the end of the criminal investigation, when the Commonwealth Attorney makes a finding on criminal charges. At that point, I would review all of the CERT investigation materials, the interviews, the CERT report, any sort of body-worn camera footage that's related with the incident, any other evidentiary materials. And I'm both reviewing it for purposes of looking at the use of force itself, but also any other policy violation. So sometimes the use of force itself may be within policy, but there might be other things, body-worn camera footage activation, or other things that may need to be addressed, whether they're, less serious or more serious. There sometimes can be other things. So sometimes we may need to conduct additional interviews because the purview of a CERT investigation is going to be different, right? They're going to be asking specifically about the use of force and not necessarily some of the other administrative policies. But if I'm looking at the footage and I don't find that there are other policy violations that need to be addressed or need to be investigated, obviously in collaboration with OPR, then usually we will not find the need to conduct additional officer interviews unless there's some unanswered questions that we have. But again, usually those are pertaining to other policies not related to use of force, because those are by and large going to be covered by the CERT investigation. At that point, I will brief the COB similar to how I do with any other interview, the two COB leads, sometimes with, or usually my course of action with critical incident. When it happens, I will alert the COB via email. If there's a press release or some sort of information that's gone out from, that's publicly available, I'll include that as well, and just kind of let the COB know, like, hey, I reported to the scene. I, have eyes on this, or I'm working on this investigation. But typically any sort of facts related to the criminal investigation will not be shared or briefed until the conclusion of the criminal investigation. So, but I will obviously, alert you all that something has happened if you haven't already seen it or heard about it, and let you know what my role is and where I'm at in terms of the investigation. Obviously, at the conclusion of that, I would produce a report similar to any other investigation that I do, and then provide that to you all as well as OPR. Any questions about that so far? Okay. Oh, I see.
Actually, I had
go
one
ahead.
question, Mummy.
Mhm.
Sorry, I just put it in the chat. For the briefing the COB, is it in all CERT reviews, or is it like up to your discretion to decide whether to brief the COB?
It's all CERT reviews, but when I can brief the COB is included in the MOU. So I'm not permitted, the information is considered confidential and essentially sealed until the criminal investigation is closed. So that's the point at which I would be able to brief the COB on information that's not publicly available.
Thanks.
But for any CERT investigation, you'll absolutely get briefed, particularly the leads of the investigation. Which for the public purposes, if for anybody watching this, the leads would be 2 COB members, usually including either the chair or the vice chair, and then one other member of the COB that rotates out. So that 2 people would be assigned to the investigation, and those would be my primary point of contact. But the entire COB, which we'll get into in just a moment, will have access to all of the evidentiary materials once they're released, including the interviews, body-worn camera footage, as well as any reports from my office or from OPR and the CERT report. So you will all have the ability to review all of the information. It will just be the 2 leads primarily. And that's just because of the rules that you can't have more than 2 COB members in a meeting at once, or it's a public meeting. So that's why we have 2 people assigned to each investigation, just for public purposes of understanding. Any other questions about?
So for this case that we prepared for today, who are the COB leads?
It would be Dave for this one. It would have been Jim, but unfortunately he is leaving us, which we'll talk about later, sadly. But that's who typically would have been assigned to this investigation. It typically goes in alphabetical order, so he would have been next up by last name. There was something else I was going to add to your question, but it left me. It'll come back. Any other questions? No? Okay. So as I mentioned, the COB will get access to all of the same evidentiary materials that I have access to. It's just you'd get them at a different time period at the conclusion of the investigation, whereas I would be receiving these materials in real time. Then you all will hold a public meeting in the same way that you always do. Oh, I remembered what it was I was going to say. So for this particular CERT investigation that we're going to review at our next meeting, just for context, it occurred in October of 2022. And I mentioned this in my report, but just procedurally, the role that I just explained on the previous slide was a little bit different in that investigation, where I played more of a review role versus a, collaborative investigatory role, because the MOU was not yet signed. So I had just onboarded in June of that year, and then June of 2022, this incident happened in October of 2022, and then the MOU was signed that following April. So I did get some kind of individual briefings on it, and was aware of what was going on, but it wasn't the same process as what I just articulated in terms of an hour notification and attending the CERT briefings and being on scene right away. So finally, the COB would make independent findings, policy and training recommendations, and publish a report in the same way that you would with any other investigation. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about information sharing and access, and I think I kind of touched on this throughout the last two slides as well, but just to reiterate, I do have access to body-worn camera footage, reports from OPR, CERT, use of force report, the CERT investigation itself, any sort of briefings, officer interviews, anything of that nature, anything that OPR has access to throughout the course of the administrative investigation, I would also have access to as well. The COB, as I mentioned earlier, would get kind of information that is not deemed confidential, just to kind of know that something has occurred and what the status of it is, but full access to the materials would come at the conclusion of the criminal investigation. Any questions on any of that? Great. We thought it would also be helpful to provide some context about CERT investigations and what those have looked like so far, and then the broader context of what that looks like in terms of calls for service that ACPD does. So I'm going to turn that back over to ACPD to talk about.
So as I mentioned before, the MOU was signed in November 12th. Actually, I think I said November 13th, but it's November 12th of 2021. And I wanted to make sure that we had a good 5-year look back. So I checked in 2021 and in 2022. That should say 2020 or 2021, because I know most of 2021 is captured there. So there were no officer-involved shootings in 2020 or 2021. Since the inception of CERT to date, we have had 4 activations of the CERT team, okay? 2 of which are officer-involved shootings. The other 2 are not officer-involved shooting. One was a jail death back in October 5th of 2021. The other one was a home explosion that occurred on Arlington Street, and that was not an officer-involved shooting. So 2 times this agency has had to apply lethal force with their firearm against an individual over the last 5 years. That is not a lot of times. I want to just bring that, because that is something that I want to highlight. 2 shootings in the last 5 years. That is not a lot, okay? To bring that a little bit more into context, I looked at the number of calls for service in the last 5 years. Okay, this is based on the annual report. There was approximately 300,000, over 300,000 calls for service that ACPD responded to in the last 5 years. This agency has also made 51,000 arrests in the last 5 years, okay? And we had to discharge our firearms against an individual 2 times, okay? So all that into context, I think you all are acutely aware of just the low number of complaints that we have against this agency and everything, and the number of uses of forces that we have as well. But to have 2 officer-involved shootings in the last 5 years, I think is a testament to the way that we train our officers, to the guidance that we provide them about understanding what is, permitted, what is not permitted, and then staying on top of current training trends, which is something that we're always looking to do. And Selena has a question.
I was wondering, Officer Kim, if you could talk about, could you compare this in any way to the other police forces that are part of the CERT?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can just tell you what our numbers are and then and having just, on its face, even a layperson can look at that and say, hey, it's only been 2 times in the last 5 years. That is not a lot of times.
Yeah, I was thinking about it more like just in terms of your labor and your involvement in this process. Like, how do you have a sense of whether that, like, how valuable that's been? Is it taking your officers and your staff out of the county a lot, or it'd just be interesting to know how often process is being used?
You're talking about the CERT team activating.
Yes.
There's some I mean, I don't have the numbers. I don't know what they are, but there's times when we may have people out of the county. You never know when something like this is going to happen. So if 2 things happen, part of the CERT commander's job is try to spread it around. So if there's 2 officer involved shootings within the Northern Virginia region, I can't give up 4 detectives at once and our crime scene unit. So really a lot of the CERT commander's job is to, spread it out. And that's why you might get one investigator from Prince William, one from Arlington, one from Manassas. And it lightens the burden. There's 3 different crime scene teams that work under the CERT umbrella. It's Arlington, Prince William, and Alexandria. So, obviously, if we have a shooting here, it would either be Prince William or Alexandria who would do the crime scene and the evidence processing work. But if it's in Prince William, it could be us or Alexandria. But, I think there's a concerted effort to make sure that, we provide the high quality investigation that we're all looking for, but the commander does try to spread it out a bit. Everybody has staffing challenges, so that is always on his mind, I know.
Chief, there's of the 4 incidents where CERT has been activated, I would say that obviously the 2 officer involved shootings are very straightforward. But the other 2, the jail death and the home explosion, aren't your like typical critical incidents. Can you talk about the considerations you made in deciding to activate CERT in those instances?
Sure. So for the jail death, it was a scenario where we had, and I don't remember the exact time, within 24 hours or so, we had arrested the person, we had interaction with the person, and I felt like that was so recent that it made sense for me to ask CERT to come investigate that. The home explosion, I looked at that as sort of an in custody death. I mean, the house was surrounded by police officers. We had broken out the front window, doing all the things we could to bring it to a peaceful resolution. But the truth is, it's not like he could walk out the door and leave. So I looked at that as an in custody death. And that's what drove me to ask CERT to come investigate that. And it was CERT along with the ATF and the FBI. But those were the driving forces in my head to ask for CERT on those 2.
Thank you. I think that's helpful context to know that, you're maybe not required to necessarily activate CERT in those instances, but you're choosing to do so for purposes of just transparency and having independent eyes on it.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions about CERT activations or the process or anything like that before we move on?
I had one question, just another quick clarification question. The MOU talks about circumstances in which the critical incident reports, these protocols shall be followed, but then it references the CEOs or chief executive officers of the agencies and when they may activate. So is that distinction meaningful, that there are incidents and that shall be followed the protocol, and then the CEO of an agency may activate when those incidents occur, or does it really happen every single time?
So you're talking about the chief may decide to call for CERT or not? That's what your question is, right?
Correct.
It gives
Like
the parameters of when it's
actually exercise that discretion, or if it meets kind of the definitions of a critical incident in the protocol, do you just always activate it?
I mean, I think that's up to the individual chief, but my position is if it meets the criteria, I'm going to call for CERT.
Copy. Thank you.
So next, I just wanted to say, for members of the public who, may watch this, the purpose of civilian oversight being involved in these critical incidents, in addition to having the independent lens of the CERT team, is to provide an additional layer of public transparency into, what happened during these incidents and what the investigations looked like, both from the CERT perspective as well as the administrative investigation. And so members of the public can, get involved by attending the meetings on these particular reviews, giving feedback, obviously, during our public portion of the meetings, or submitting any sort of feedback, be it commendations, complaints, or recommendations on our website. I don't know if you, Chief, wanted to speak to any sort of considerations that ACPD has in terms of, media releases or anything related to sharing of information during a critical incident investigation. And I think that would probably be the last thing that I'd want to touch on for community purposes.
Sure. So anytime an incident like this occurs, we will, we'll start pushing information as quickly as we can. So normally the way something like this would work is initially we will post some information on X. But that can be even before the public information officer even gets to the scene to make people aware something's happening. And then as soon as we get a general idea of everything that occurred, we'll start briefing the media. And, that will occur that day, that night, within an hour or two of the incident occurring. And then normally, sometime later, that if it's in the evening, maybe the next morning, we'll do an actual press release to make sure that it goes out to all the media and the community. And depending on the circumstance, we've had press conferences. We certainly get inquiries that we respond to, but our goal is to make sure we keep the community informed of what's going on as quickly as we can. But, an incident like this, I'm sure you can imagine, can be very chaotic, and it takes some time to have enough information to share, because it's important to us that what we share, we're pretty confident is actually fact. So we take a little bit of time to make sure that we have enough information available to us to inform the community, but inform as accurately and completely as we can. And, it comes in different stages, from the initial post to on-scene media to a press release, and then follow-up information, like once the Commonwealth Attorney is done with her review, there'll be more information that'll come out at that point as well, often by her office, but it could be in conjunction with our office. So the goal is to keep people informed as we move through it. I mean, the truth is sometimes these investigations take time. I mean, one of the things that we didn't spend a lot of time on is it's also the CERT's responsibility to not only collect the evidence, but preserve it and take evidence to the lab that needs to be forensically examined. And that can take, depending on what tests are being run, that can take weeks to months to be done. So, sometimes it does take a fair amount of time before we have everything complete. So, but we share information as we can, and we certainly respond to requests when we get them. I think that's it.
Yep, that's it as far as the training goes, and just want to open up the floor if there are any other lingering questions for Q&A. Oh, I think Charles had a question. Can we speak about other potential agencies joining the CERT group in the next re-up, Fairfax, Loudoun, or Washington Metro Transit? Fairfax is a part of this, or MOUs. No? Oh, they're not? Okay. I thought I saw their name on the signatories. Alexandria is, but it's missing from the signatories on there. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're due to re-sign the MOU, and, we'll again, I mean, it was shared with all localities and will be shared again. That's ultimately up to the individual jurisdiction.
Any other questions?
Thank you. That was a really helpful kind of refresher of the details and kind of nuances across different situations. Anything else from the COB? Okay, thank you. Well, I know initially we had some access to the report issues. I know that's been resolved. We were given some evidence highlights that I want to make sure everyone takes time to watch. Obviously, these are critical incidents, so they're sensitive. Make time and space for that. And we are going to have to reschedule our June meeting, but we will review that case in June. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone. Moving on, we have I only have a few short updates, and then Mummy probably has some updates. The big one came out in the conversation that unfortunately tonight is Jim Miller's last meeting. We are very sad to lose him, but it's an exciting adventure for him and his family. Jim, is there anything you want to say in your final send-off?
Thank you. Yes, Chair Evans, I would like to just take an opportunity just for public record. I like to read my resignation memo. I think it captures exactly kind of how I'm feeling. Of course, it's bittersweet for me, but nonetheless, we are looking forward to our next adventure. So with that, if time allows, I'd like to just to kind of highlight a little bit about why I've decided to resign. So it's been an honor to serve as an inaugural non-voting member of the Community Oversight Board since my appointment in March in 2022. Really appreciate the opportunity to contribute to our very important work within this board in fostering trust and transparency between Arlington County Police Department and our community. I was privileged to bring my past law enforcement experience to our open dialogue, fostering transparency and connection with our fellow board members in our community. The decision comes as my spouse has accepted a significant appointment as our new consul general to our U.S. consulate in Hyderabad, India. So we'll be moving and relocating to Hyderabad this August. I am so grateful for this experience that I've gained and the incredible dedication of my fellow board members. The bonds we forged have truly created friendships, and a big special note of appreciation for the opportunity to serve alongside Mummy. Her kindness, her candor, and passion are boundless. I deeply believe in meaningful and rewarding nature of volunteer work at the community level, and I'm so proud to have served alongside each and all of you. So thank you for the opportunity to support our community.
Yeah, we're so grateful. You have been a tremendous asset from the very beginning, and in very typical overachieving Jim fashion, he has recruited or recommended replacement. So if anyone ever tries to leave in the future, the bar is set higher. But Jim, we wish you, and your family all kinds of success and adventure in this next chapter, and we will find you when you get back.
Thank you.
So because we met tonight virtually, we will schedule a happy hour send-off in the next month so we can all get together. We've got a few tokens of appreciation we'd like to share with you, and just, some last hugs before you step onto the airplane. So
wonderful.
Yeah. Last night we had a really great community engagement meeting with a small faith-based group of folks who are curious about our work. Selena has been very creative and persistent, bringing energy to an area of our work that we have been kind of missing and looking for engagement. So, Selena, is there anything you want to kind of share about last night's event?
Just to say that we met at Callaway Church, which is a historically African-American church in the Halls Hill area. And we had a really interesting group of people. And they come from 7 different churches, the people who are there, and they meet regularly to talk about criminal justice issues. And they also talk about education, poverty, lots of different issues. And this group seems to have the ability to get involved. Like, so if we have questions or if we could use, support for the work that we're doing, they're happy to, write letters to the Virginia state legislature, or however they can get involved and be helpful. So I think it's a good group of people that is actively involved and interested in the community.
Yeah, thank you. Mummy, is there anything you want to add about last night?
Nothing that you all haven't already mentioned other than just, I think this is like a critical aspect of the work that we're doing. I think the more we get out there, the more people learn about the work that we're doing. It's also really valuable to get input from community. One big takeaway from you is just kind of hearing their thoughts about the meetings that we've had. Some of them had joined meetings before, and getting feedback from them about like how they're receiving the meetings, how we're giving information out to the public. Is it digestible? Is it, are they able to understand it well? Are they able to appreciate it well? Is there different ways that we can deliver information that would be more effective? So that's always great information and feedback for us to continue to improve our process and how we interact with folks during meetings as well as when we're interacting with them. So I look forward to more of those. Opportunities, and just echo Julie's sentiments, Selena, that we're like infinitely grateful that you're passionate about getting our community engagement really off the ground. It's difficult to be out there with the capacity that we have, especially with limited staffing. So I'm just really grateful that you've dedicated a lot of your time, your free time, to making sure that we make those connections. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Selena. It was a really great group of people, and they definitely had some interesting, specific, kind of actionable feedback for us in terms of how we present information in our meetings. So we'll see some of those updates. We'll try some new things, and also some kind of ideas about, the police that we will look forward to sharing with ACPD kind of separately. But it was really rewarding to meet in a smaller group. It was informal, not a lot of pomp and circumstance, just kind of direct community engagement, and a mixed group of different perspectives. That was interesting too. For reports, we have 2 more reports going to ACPD shortly from completed cases, and we should, by the end of this week, also have the report from the April meeting that we did ready to circulate. So we'll stage those out a little bit. So we've got time to process those, and then an annual report that we're planning to release in early June. And then my last update for tonight is I've got a link for the ride-alongs that I'm going to send to you all, just mid-year reminder that before things get too crazy in the summer, or if you've got some time, it might be a good opportunity to just schedule a ride-along and make sure that we keep those going throughout the year. So I'll make sure you guys all have that link handy, and I think that's all I have for tonight. Mummy?
Thank you. Well, first, I just wanted to add to your recognition of Jim and just say I'm so grateful for everything that you've done in getting us here. You were there really from the beginning. Jim was actually on my interview panel when I applied for this job. So he's been there with me literally from the beginning up until now, and was super instrumental in making sure that we got operationalized and got our training done. And it's just very much an organized and sound person to lean on whenever you need some help getting things together or need some advice. And you're more than a COB member, you're a friend. So I'm really going to miss you. Sorry, I'm trying to get emotional. But thank you so much for everything that you've done and all the time that you have dedicated to making sure that we're successful. It really means a lot.
Thank you. All the love and support.
Likewise. Secondly, I was able to attend a promotional ceremony last night prior to going to the community engagement meeting. So thank you to Chief Penn and staff for inviting me out there. I really, wanted to underscore our desire to show up for you guys in times of celebration and not just always be a voice of critique or constructive criticism. And so I was really happy to see the promotion ceremony last night. The police department promoted 1 captain, 3 lieutenants, 3 sergeants, and 6 corporals. And I don't know if it's PC or not to say in this day and time, but I was really happy to see the representation of women in the group. So just shout out to you all in the diversity of the department. I think that's wonderful. And I was really happy to see that. So I'm going to always talk about diversity and amplify it. I don't know if it's acceptable socially or not anymore, but it is over here. We love to see it. So thank you guys for inviting us and allowing us to be a part of that. The second thing that I wanted to highlight was the traffic stop data analysis. We had our first kickoff meeting with the contractor that we selected. We did a RFP process for it, so public bidding process. We selected CNA Corporation for our vendor, linking them in the chat there if you want to just kind of read about them. And then I'll be able to make sure to circulate to you all if you hadn't already seen it, the kind of scope of work that we've outlined for this project. I think I shared it with Julie and Dave a while ago, but I'm not sure if the whole group saw it or not. So I'll recirculate that just so you have an idea of what that looks like. And we're obviously working on it in partnership with ACPD. Albert and I reviewed the application and sat on the interview panel and whatnot. So we are starting what's probably going to be at least I would guess, 12-month project of reviewing traffic stops going back to 2020 all the way to 2025. And obviously the underlying purpose of this traffic stop data analysis is to kind of do an evaluation, if you will, or diagnostic, as I like to call it, for any sort of bias or racial profiling issues or things like that we've identified, contraband hit rate. One of the big things too that we're trying to ascertain in this kind of scope of work is identifying what is the kind of right benchmark for doing this type of analysis. I think we've talked very briefly, at least I see your hand up, the data person is chiming in. The census data we know is not always the most accurate representation of the kind of benchmark that you want to use in an analysis like this, especially in a transient area like Arlington that has people from all different areas kind of driving through it at any given time. So it's really important that we explore, in addition to using census data, other ways to kind of try to hone in on exactly what the population is that we should be comparing the race of the drivers who are involved in these traffic stops to get the most accurate representation, which is I learned through this process, kind of evolving area of data analytics. Like there isn't a set standard. So part of this is kind of figuring out what that standard should be. And I get the sense that it may differ from, one demographic area to another. So data, Lisa, I'll go to you. And then if you all, Chief or anyone from ACPD want to chime in at all on the traffic stop data analysis, I'm happy to open the floor.
No, I just want to volunteer because I'd like to be involved. And I do remember, first of all, this is really exciting. I'm really glad to see this. This is very, very exciting because traffic stops so often lead to, we know, because we've reviewed so many cases, understanding traffic stops, I think, is really key. So I'm really glad we're doing this. So kudos to everybody who made it happen. But that's all I wanted. I just want to volunteer. I remember giving some input really early on. So yeah, I just want to be involved. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and certainly can take all the hands and help that we can get, especially with your background. And also just thank you as well to the county manager and the county board for making sure that this project got funded and pushed through. It was not something that we would have been able to afford with our budget or even probably with ACPD's. We're all stretched really thin on resources. So we just appreciate the extra financial support in making this happen. Hopefully the next undertaking in terms, I don't know if we're going to need to do a full-on RFP process or not. At some point, I'm sure that we probably will, but the next kind of administrative undertaking in terms of a consultant will be the bias policing consultant that we've talked about as well. As we've kind of really laid out the scope of work for the traffic stop data analysis, we started to realize that there may be some overlap that would be helpful, or some continuation of the traffic stop data analysis that can help inform the bias-free policing work that we want to do. And one thing I also wanted to mention is, and you'll see this in the scope of work, not only are we doing the analysis for quantitative data, we've also asked the consultant to make some recommendations about qualitative data that could be helpful to furthering the analysis, as well as providing recommendations for policy and training from the information that they glean from doing their review as well. So I'm hoping for some really insightful kind of outcomes from this work, and definitely look forward to collaboration with you, Lisa, and Police Department on that. Are there any other questions about that before I move on? The only other thing that I wanted to mention is that we got a large number of applicants for the senior management analyst position this second roll around. And so we are, I think, at the very end of looking, we've done our first round interviews, so we're at the final stages of reviewing those. And then we're hoping to begin the in-person interviews and get some candidates selected. Hopefully within the next month. I'm hoping to have that person onboarded before the end of the fiscal year. So fingers crossed that happens, but I'm really pleased to have the good problem of having just a lot of really great candidates to select from. So hopefully we'll get that underway very soon. The last thing I wanted to mention is that in case you all didn't see it in the budget report out, the county board also did approve $25,000 of temporary staff support for our work, whether it be helping out with some administrative things on my end, or helping out with COB reports, or providing any sort of administrative support that the COB needs. So we'll be working to get a person, and it's probably going to be with like a paralegal background or something of that nature, is what I'm envisioning, to get onboarded and help with any sort of administrative support, namely reports for investigations and things like that. So that process should be underway as well very soon. I think those are my main report outs. Obviously, once I get someone in the senior management analyst position, I hope to very shortly afterwards get back to sending you all regular reports and that sort of thing. It's just administratively, I've had to reprioritize getting those things out, but you'll get like a pretty large cumulative report on the work that we've done for our investigations for your records soon, and then hopefully an annual report later on in the year as well. And that's it for me, unless anyone has any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. We didn't receive any requests for public comment, and we don't have any members of the public. So hearing no input, we'll go to open discussion, and I'll say, I probably should have saved Jim's announcement for the end, but I am looking forward to an opportunity to gather in person and share more of our sentiments of appreciation. It has been so fun to work with you, and valuable, extra car rides and whatever to get your perspective. I think you brought really initial maturity and, a lot of kind of quality and depth of perspective. When I think about diversity, I think about, representing multiple perspectives and how useful that role is on the COB. So we're sorry that you had to be the only non-voting member for so long, but you really did offered us enough value to not need a second one. So thank you again. And if there's any open discussion items, we can hear those now.
I'll just second everything about Jim, and hopefully we can schedule when we really appreciate it.
Dave, I think your computer might be sick too. You were a little choppy, but I think you were saying that you want us to make sure we get it scheduled for June and that you look forward to it.
Thanks, Dave.
I was just basically saying thanks.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for getting together tonight. Thank you, ACPD, for your time, kind of helping us go over all those details. We will be much better equipped for the conversation at our next meeting, and look forward to seeing everyone again soon.
Have a good night.
Have a good night, y'all.
Thank you all. Have a great night.